They photograph it, they tweet about it, they trek far from the beaten path to find unique offerings or just the right ingredients. Millennials are obsessed with food, says author Eve Turow Paul in her new book, A Taste of Generation Yum, how the millennial generation's love for organic fare, celebrity chefs, and microbrews will make or break the future of food. And Eve joins us now tonight from New York, New York. It's good to see you, Eve. Tell me, for starters, why you felt it necessary to write this book.
Well, I didn't really feel that it was necessary at first. I started investigating the topic really maybe for an article or perhaps just to fulfill a school assignment initially. And then I really realized how interesting and how vast this topic really was. And before I knew it, it had turned into a book.
Well, vast is right, because you did interview hundreds of people for this book, including the very famous Anthony Bourdain. And here's a quote from him. He says, absolutely the engine of dining, even fine dining now, across the board is this generation of seemingly food-obsessed people who are willing to drive an hour and a half for a sweet taco or save up money that my generation would have spent on cocaine to go to Le Bernardin, which I hope, Eve, I'm pronouncing properly, that restaurant on West 51st in New York. Did I say it right?
Yes, Le Bernardin.
Okay,
yeah.
good
You
enough.
can say it however you want.
Do you want to give us some examples of how millennials are obsessing over food these days?
Well, I mean, the examples you really can see everywhere, right? So a lot of people are very familiar at this point with food porn. If you turn on your television or go on Pinterest or Instagram, or even turn on the Food Network, you're seeing these glistening, oozing shots of, almost like scintillating shots of food. And this is a completely new thing. Now, the obsession with food for the millennial generation is not just showing up in the media, it's also changing your home kitchen designs. It's changing the restaurant scene. It's changing grocery stores. It's changing publications in terms of actual memoirs and cookbooks. So and even more so, it's also having an effect on politics and big food companies. So the ramifications of how this generation is spending their money and the passion that they are placing on food is really having an effect in a lot of different areas.
If it's new, I've got to ask whether you think it's the real deal or is it just a fad?
So this really was my main question as well going into this was, what's driving the trend? I didn't even start by saying, oh, it's the millennial generation that's obsessed with food. All I saw was young people spending inordinate amounts of money on underground dinners in New York and saving the number for frozen yogurt shops into their phones, and really started to question, well, so is this a fad, right? Is this something that's going to be passing? And the deeper my research got, I really discovered that that our obsession with food today is satisfying a very distinct need for the millennial generation, and it's something that's going to last. And you're actually really seeing this already being passed down to Generation Z, or digital natives as they're called right now, which is the generation younger than millennials, who seem to be even more food obsessed from an even younger age.
Let's read our excerpt from the book here, shall we? You write, back at Amherst College, food simply wasn't important. Afternoons, I'd head to the dining hall, avoid the rumored grade D meat and piled gelatinous brown rice, pre-cooked mushy pinto beans, blocks of bouncy tofu, and unlabeled white shredded cheese into a red ceramic bowl. After dousing with salt, I'd place it in the microwave and zap my way to an edible meal. Now, you apparently have changed because we've looked at your Instagram account, and here's some homemade beef pho, I guess. Is that how you pronounce it? P-H-O? Pho?
Yeah, pho.
Okay, just shows
Pho.
you, this is not my thing, but you're going to educate me here as we go through it. Okay, let's look at another one. Bindi masala dinner. Okay, that's pretty neat. And then finally, stir-fried cellophane noodles with seated scallops, because we don't want our scallops...
Oh, sorry, that should say, it should say seared.
Oh,
that was a typo
seared.
on my part.
Okay, because I was going to say, we don't want our scallops standing, so I assume they have to be seated.
Yeah.
But you meant seared. Okay.
That was a typo.
And squid to boot. Okay, Eve, my question is, what the hell happened to you anyway?
I'm sorry, say that again.
My question is, what happened to you? You seemed like such a normal person about food in college, and now all of a sudden you're one of these, obsessive millennial types. What happened to you?
I am. I completely fit into the stereotype of the people that I write about. And that really was one of the questions that I wanted to answer and one of the reasons I became so interested in the topic. Because as you said, in college, I could not have cared less where my food was coming from. I was not thinking about it. I didn't care to spend any time in the kitchen. Fast forward 5 years, I'm working for Mark Bittman, who's one of the most famous food writers in the United States, and doing recipe development for him. And what happened to me is really what happened to a good percentage of my generation, which is the fact that we were growing up, well, are growing up still, in the technological sphere and need to find a way to kind of break out of that. And food has become, in essence, an anti-technology for my generation that's providing very distinct things that we are craving at this moment.
So this is a response to what otherwise is an overabundance of technology in your lives. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, so you're seeing a lot of reporting today on what the effect is going to be of growing up with technology. And a lot of people are looking at, say, 2- and 3-year-olds today who are learning to swipe, on the iPad from day one, but they're not looking at the millennial generation. And we really are the first generation ever to have one foot in and one foot out of the technological boom. And while I learned the Dewey Decimal System in the library, I also learned how to make a really great PowerPoint presentation. And we're the first generation to grow up with our lives completely connected in the digital space. So I think it's really important that people look at us as an example of what the ramifications are of that kind of engagement. And what we're seeing is that a lot of millennials are craving things that are missing from their lives because of the time they're spent in the technological sphere. So I say that food is the anti-technology. And I want to be clear, there are a lot of things that can be the anti-technology. For example, adult coloring books are also gaining in popularity. But food offers 4 distinct things that other anti-technologies do not. One of it is sensory stimulation. A lot of people think of us as an overstimulated generation because we're sitting in front of screens so much of the time. But the reality is that what makes us human, one of the most human elements of us, is missing, right? We don't have our sense of smell or even auditory that's being stimulated throughout the day. It's really just our eyes and maybe our fingertips. So a lot of the young people that I ended up talking to were expressing that kind of satisfaction of chopping something, hearing it sizzle, maybe feeling the steam coming off of a plate. So sensory stimulation is a big part of this. Another part is community. So many studies at this point have shown that G-chatting your friends or Snapchatting them, it is not fulfilling in the same way that a face-to-face conversation is. And millennials, statistically speaking, are on their phones more than any other generation, except when they are out eating. That is when actually Gen Xers are more likely to have their phones out than millennials. Young people, yes, they're taking the obligatory shot of their food before they eat, but then they're putting their phones away and really understanding that that's a face-to-face time to really gather with their community and forge those kinds of relationships and eye contact. Another big aspect of what food offers is identity formation. So now more than ever, young people are branding themselves online. This is part of what contributes to our said narcissism. I think it's well known that people think of us as narcissistic. And people are starting to brand themselves with what food they're eating and what they're posting online, saying that they care about organic or fair trade ingredients and so forth. And the fourth and I think the most important thing that food provides us is control. So a lot of young people today are feeling out of control for a variety of reasons. It can be the recession, it can be climate change, and they're finding that food is putting them in the driver's seat for their own lives. It's a choice that they can make 3 times a day. And you're seeing the ramifications of this throughout the food world in terms of demanding simple ingredients, demanding transparency, and also a greater desire to get to know who's providing your food, whether that's the farmer or the chef.
Well, that's interesting because your generation, I think in particular, is quite in touch with its concerns about loneliness and its concerns about increasing anxiety, even depression. Exactly. And I wonder whether you see, so you do see a connection there between all of those things and the obsession with food.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And really, I think that that's one of the biggest things that marketers today are missing. When they talk about what the millennial generation wants, a lot of it's just based on statistics of consumption. But there are very few people looking at the underlying drive for this. And the biggest commonality that we have is rising rates of depression, anxiety, and loneliness. And I do think that that is defining us as a generation and our behaviors.
Well, since you asked it a second ago, let me let me put the question to you. Are millennials, is this a reflection of what other generations might call the narcissistic, horrible aspect of your generation?
So a lot of people say that, right? They say that millennials are narcissistic, lazy, self-obsessed, self-interested. And after 4 years of research and lots of interviews, I can tell you that we are more narcissistic than other generations. But I don't blame us for that. And that's because we've grown up in a time when self-branding is everything. You need to brand yourself differently on LinkedIn than you do on Facebook, than you do on OkCupid. You need to worry about how you're presenting yourself, not just in person, but also online to get a date or get a job or, show your friends how great your weekend was. So there is a focus on the self, unlike we've ever seen before. There is kind of this growing idea that what we are experiencing is not necessarily narcissism, it's humanism. It's a greater appreciation for people's individuality, and we appreciate our own individuality, but also others.
I want to circle back to something you said several minutes ago, which was that not only does this newfound interest in all things food result in a lot of the things that you've already enumerated, but also affects politics and the choices people make around politics. Can you go into that a bit? What do you mean by that?
Sure. So back in the 1970s, there were scares about DDT. And the result was the macrobiotic movement. There were some people that started to pay attention to vegetarianism. But for the most part, that part of food policy was really on the fringes. Today, you're seeing it become part of the masses, enough so that it's starting to really affect big food. What this means is that McDonald's has announced that they're going to only use cage-free eggs, that they're going to remove antibiotics from their chicken. And a lot of places are following suit. So Panera, Chick-fil-A, I don't know, you name it, Chipotle, right? They're removing GMOs, they're taking the preservatives out of their food. Every company is doing it a little bit differently, but the point is that the market is responding to millennial demands for simplicity, for nutritious food, and for transparency. And the result of this potentially could be actual political change. So something that I'm a major advocate for is updates to the Farm Bill. And a lot of the pressure on Washington is not coming quite yet from foodies, but it could. And I think that the way that that could happen is by foodies really voicing their opinions through their dollars to big food, and then big food in turn affecting Washington.
Do you think this has yet had any impact on the presidential campaign of the two major parties currently ongoing?
Well, it's really interesting. So my former employer, Mark Bittman, is actually meeting with the candidates in Iowa, I believe, tomorrow to talk about this. And I really wish that it was a little bit more at the forefront of the debates, because really food relates to so much. It relates to our healthcare system. It relates to taxes. It relates to climate change. It encompasses all of these different things in one. And deciding how we're going to feed people, not just in the US, but around the world, right? Because our food system is so connected at this point to other countries, I think should be a #1 voting issue. Dan Barber very smartly pointed out that he believes that it is not of current conversation because the primaries are happening first in Iowa, where there is a big representation, obviously, for corn farmers. And it would not really make the presidential nominees look so great if they were talking about taking farm subsidies away from corn farmers.
Having said that, your friend Mark Bittman did write last year that, quote, the still-forming food movement must narrow its focus to a few possible-to-win issues. So tell us, what are those possible-to-win issues?
Well, so a lot of my research really focused on, again, what's the underlying needs of the millennial generation and what is driving our consumption behavior. And part of that is our narcissism and it is our need to brand. So the part of the food movement that I think people could really coalesce around is food waste. It's something that you can put recipes for on Pinterest. You can take pictures of whatever you're doing and put it on Instagram. You can feel really good about branding yourself with the fact that you used your carrot tops in a pesto or what have you. And I do think that that's something that's going to start to talk about also the imbalance that we have in terms of food distribution throughout the United States and the world, really. So, the important thing is that Michael Pollan said to me that the gay rights movement, for example, was not a given that they were going to be working towards gay marriage as a first step. they had to coalesce around that idea. There are a lot of different rights that you should be fighting for in terms of being a gay individual. But they decided gay marriage was the way to go, and they won that fight. And for the food movement, there's so many different reasons to be involved. It could be because you care about your own health. It could be about the environment. It could be about animal rights. It could be about a whole different number of things. So, Mark Bittman's right. Michael Pollan is right. We need to gather around one core issue in order to get anything done. I do believe food waste is the first step towards making big change.
Most movements, though, need a leader. Does this movement need a leader, and or does it have a leader?
I don't think it has a leader yet. It's a really good question, and I do think about this a lot, about who is going to be that person who's going to step out in the front and really get people riled up and going. Dan Barber in New York is a really big name. People love what he's doing, but I think it's very specific to New York. He has done a lot to educate people on what's in their food, how their food is grown, the ecosystem of farming today, all the way to the restaurant table. But it's going to be really interesting to see, if someone from the millennial generation can step up and really get all these minds together, because there's a lot of great stuff that's happening around the country, from Silicon Valley into the Midwest, into the East Coast. And we really do need someone, or maybe a group of people, who are going to get those like minds together to help make greater change.
I'm going to ask you two more brief questions, the first of which is,
okay.
Eve, when's the last time you ate at McDonald's?
Oh, I actually think I know the answer to this. Last time I ate at a McDonald's was when I was in Thailand. And I remember feeling so ashamed of myself because I was in a country which is the best eating I've ever done in my life. And I had roommates at the time in Thailand, and my roommates wanted to go to McDonald's, and I went, and I had chicken McNuggets.
How ashamed of yourself are you for doing that?
But, that's the food that I grew up on. There is something that, is so homey and comforting about it. And, I think the hope is that going forward, those kinds of homey foods will be some kind of alternative for my kids, right? I don't want them to crave chicken McNuggets. Understood.
Okay, and the last question, what's the best meal you ever had in your whole life?
That is an impossible question to answer. I have been blessed with lots of great meals in my life, and I think that my favorite meals, looking back, actually are more about the people that I'm with, the environment that I'm in, than are about the food. So, any kind of happy memory is the best meal for me.
That's a neat answer. A taste of Generation Yum. That's Eve Turow Paul, who's been our guest from New York, New York. Eve, it's been a delicious interview. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.